Tensions are flaring yet again with North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia, followed by the regime's launch of what's suspected to be an intercontinental ballistic missile. And with the upcoming U.S. presidential election next week, the outcome is set to impact the Korean Peninsula significantly. For more on this, we have Dr. Richey, professor of international politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Dr. Richey, thanks for joining us this morning.
Great, thanks for having me.
So, Dr. Richey, North Korea launched what the Joint Chiefs of Staff say is presumed to be an intercontinental ballistic missile this morning, just hours after top defense officials of South Korea and the U.S. met in Washington. What's your take on this?
So, in general, North Korea launches ballistic missiles for multiple reasons. They're not always each of those reasons present, but they have multiple reasons why they do so. That can be for demonstration effect, so underlining the fact that denuclearization is off the table and that North Korea considers itself a de facto nuclear power. It can be for testing purposes, for new systems, new capabilities, new technologies. It can be for operational practice in terms of the actual act of executing a launch and following the command and control protocols. Of course, there's international messaging to the international community, to the United States, to South Korea, and of course for domestic political effect also. So my take on this is, in the first place, there's probably some mixture of those elements that are at play in terms of the reason for this launch. I think we need to wait for more information, whether that comes from North Korea or from South Korea and the United States and Japan intelligence. I think probably we'll get information from each of those parties in some way or another. I think some of the questions to look out for are, whether or not this is a new system or a modified system, in which case that leads towards testing being a part of the equation. One of the things, of course, we would look for there is whether or not there might have been some assistance from Russia in the development of new capabilities or modifications or new systems. If this is an older system that they've already launched, this might be for demonstration effect. This might be for operational exercise practice for the rocket forces. And then, I think we should look for North Korea's reporting on what it says that this is about. And then in terms with the capability itself, some questions that we all have are, what the range is, what the thrust of the missile is, which, really controls what the payload size can be, and therefore whether or not this might be appropriate for, a multiple reentry vehicle weapon. What the size and the range are is going to be important, and how this missile might be able to evade missile defenses.
Right, and foreign and defense officials from Seoul and Washington will also be holding another round of talks soon in Washington on North Korean troops in Russia. What might be on the agenda? Do you think there is a chance that they will discuss the issue of South Korea potentially sending lethal weapons to Ukraine?
So sure. I mean, one imagines that, for the agenda of these, U.S.-South Korea meetings, whether it be security consultative, or, other formats, 2+2 or other bilateral or single ministry bilateral meetings. One imagines you're going to see the response to this launch, both diplomatic and military, alliance coordination on a whole host of issues, whether that be an updating on where things are in South Korea with pushing the special measures agreement over the line, or whether that be discussion of ongoing discussion about the pathway towards operational control transition, so wartime operational control transition. Trilateral cooperation and making sure that trilateral cooperation with the United States, South Korea, and Japan remains on track and is regularized and institutionalized. Again, there's been discussion of how to set up a sort of secretariat for this trilateral mechanism, and there's a possibility of a final trilateral summit before Biden exits office in January of 2025. Of course, North Korea and Russia and the status of the war there is, and the cooperation between those two countries in the context of the war in Ukraine is going to be on the agenda. The regional situation in the Indo-Pacific and notably Northeast Asia, of course. And in terms of the war in Ukraine and the Russia-North Korea discussion, of course, potential weapons sales from South Korea into Ukraine probably could be on the agenda in one form or another, whether those would be in the form of direct sales or indirect sales, lethal aid, non-lethal aid, offensive weaponry, defensive weaponry. But here, I think we have to remember that it looks like it's incredibly difficult for the Yoon administration to sell lethal aid directly or even indirectly in some ways into the Ukraine war theater. And so I think that the United States is aware of that. And I think, even though the United States would certainly probably appreciate South Korea to do that, domestic political forces in South Korea make that difficult, but popularly, but also institutionally here in terms of the legal framework for lethal aid sales. So that might be on the agenda, but I think that they'll probably be more focused on workarounds, getting a common understanding, and finding creative solutions to some of the legal hurdles here, which might ultimately mean that South Korea doesn't make lethal sales directly or even directly to Ukraine.
Right, and with less than a week left until the presidential election in the U.S., can you just briefly tell us what changes can we expect in terms of foreign and diplomatic policies regarding the Korean Peninsula?
Yeah, so the smart money is on the Harris administration if it takes over from Biden, largely continuing in the same direction that has been the case with the U.S.-South Korea alliance under the Biden administration. There probably will be some changes in accent, and there could be some some differentiation of some of the priorities. But I think most people think that the aperture for creativity and risk tolerance among the Harris administration will be lower than that of an incoming Trump administration. A Trump administration, on the other hand, has a lot greater tolerance for risk, and it tends to have a larger variability in in the directions in which it's headed. It's willing to go in any international relationship. Including that of alliances. So, I think that we could definitely see an attempt to renegotiate the special measures agreement. That could cause alliance friction. I think that we could see a Trump administration attempt to try to repurpose the USFK, so the U.S. Forces Korea, to be postured more flexibly to deal with regional contingencies. And by that, one mostly understands a potential problem in the Taiwan Strait involving China and Taiwan. You might see a deterioration of the faith in deterrence provided by the United States for South Korea, which might open the door for South Korea to continue this trajectory towards perhaps developing nuclear latency. And there's, of course, a possibility that the Trump administration might actually largely support that in one way or another. And then on the North Korea dossier, I think that we can imagine that there would be a potential outreach by the Trump administration to Pyongyang. There might also be the possibility that in the lead up to that or following some type of diplomatic breakdown, we could see a return to crisis like we saw in 2017 or some other version of that.
All right, Dr. Richey, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.